Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful and benevolent. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise due to the Lord of the worlds. Rabbil Firli. May God forgive our mistakes, those that we know of and those we don't. And, all right, let's begin. Hello, everyone. I haven't given a lecture for a while. I'm back in Toronto, Canada. I thought I'd talk about something. So here it is. I hope you don't mind, but I will be playing some sort of calm music in the background. So, to begin, I wanted to focus the efforts of this lecture on just certain ideas I have connected, certain ideas that I find are parallel. And so it is the notion of, first of all, life on Earth, and it is also the notion of the perspective that God is a system admin and we find ourselves as human beings inside an existential system. And also I wanted to make these two ideas also parallel with the idea of the Kubler-Ross model. So and I've also want to read some things for you as well. So let's begin with the Kubler. So the Kubler-Ross model, it's very popular. It's also known as the 5 stages of grief. It was developed by a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So just to go through it quickly, the 5 stages of the Kubler-Ross model, the first one is denial. So an example for that would be, this can't be happening to me. The next stage is anger. Why is this happening? It's unfair. Its reaction is frustration, irritation, blaming self or others. For denial, the reaction was shock, disbelief, refusal to accept reality. Then the third stage is bargaining, reaction, trying to negotiate or find ways, often making promises to reverse the situation. An example would be, if I maybe things will get better. Then the fourth stage is depression. Its reaction is feelings of sadness, hopelessness, low energy, withdrawal. An example for it would be like, what's the point? Nothing will improve. And finally, there's acceptance, right? That's the fifth stage. So you're going through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then you come to acceptance. Recognizing and making peace with the new reality, adapting and moving forward. I accept what happened. I'll adjust and move forward. All right. So that's the talk, guys. See you later. The human mind, human existence, the lives that we live. Due to my personal observations, when a human being becomes emotional, they zoom in one layer of perception, but the human being has many layers of perception. When we go about our daily lives, we may become convinced that our life has to only follow through one avenue, or it has to function through one sort of server. But the way your mind works is that you have an instantaneous ability, you can even close your eyes or not, and you can remember images of the past, and you can visualize, let's say, functions of framework, functions of different forms in the future. So we have to kind of look at where we are right now as a human being, and then we have to look at our human civilization, the context of where we are living, and in some sense to wonder how this system is going to go forth. I don't know about many people, but I know that personally there has been moments in life where it was, even though it was through going about like my regular day, there were moments throughout the day where I felt a strange silence underneath all the sounds, all the noise that was happening. And for a moment, I paused my life. And what I mean by this is that it's as if we are an actor in a game, and if you pause the game for a second, you get to look at the screen of how your reality has meaning in that moment. So pretty much what I'm trying to say is that there have been moments where, for me personally, I've paused it. I've noticed how I am an actor in this life. Internally, through my inner cinematics, it has come across through a third person view. I think we have this ability and this capability, but I don't know how many people utilize it. Just like if you were playing a third person video game, or if you were looking at a character in a movie, I've had many moments in life where, even though my eyes are providing a direct perception, I've been able to perceive from outside of myself. You can kind of see yourself being somewhere and functioning. So I'm pretty much saying that there's been moments in my life where I've paused throughout the day, and it's kind of been slightly humorous, where I'm like, wow, look at me. I'm a character in a game, in a system. And as a character in this system, where is this character going and where is the system going? The two important questions that come to us. And human beings have different conclusions on life. But the conclusion that I reached was that this system is being administered. And it's as if we are a smaller system and there's a bigger system we're in. Our free will is how we are our own system admin, but it's limited. And then the notion that there is an unlimited system administrator, that is the notion of God. Now, the idea of God, I can see that human beings can get intimidated, overwhelmed, or even scared by it, right? But for me, it had a very fascinating, beautiful angle that there is a sort of surveillance state, and there is a sort of observation deeper than my own, that is in some sense is aligned with the flows of the world. So the conclusion that I reached is that, okay, I'm a player in a system, I'm a character in a world. This world has an administrator. The administrator is beyond the system and also observing the system. Therefore, in this existential system, it's as if a person becomes closer. Of course, this is an opinion, but a person becomes closer to the system admin when they are observing the functions of the system and also playing their part in the system. I do consider that there are limits. There's limits to how deeply a person can understand reality, and even if a person, for example, I'm Muslim, so as a Muslim, there is a passage in the Holy Book that suggests that after the prophet there is limitations for human beings in regards to revelation, getting absolute revelation. However, the system admin can choose. It is up to the system admin, which none of us know its will, right? The system admin can select or choose how much it wants to reveal to the individual character in the system. So, anyways, to link these ideas of what we see now as human beings in a world with the notion of the system admin, and to, in some sense, wonder about human beings in the world, how they are, in some sense, going through a Kubler-Ross model, right? So I'm that individual applying the Kubler-Ross model to the advancement of civilization, to the advancement of humanity. And anyways, I'm going to read some things for you now. So this is being shared, what I'm reading for you, from the human perspective and also from the perspective, but these are all, abstract, but it's interesting to be aware of, from the perspective of the human and the perspective of the system admin. So the first stage that we find human beings are in, there's nothing it can be paraphrased, let's say, through the quote, there's nothing fundamentally wrong, life is normal. So the human perspective is, for example, ignoring environmental warnings. There's a resistance to major social, technological, or spiritual shifts. There is, for example, a sort of clinging to outdated paradigms such as nationalism, consumerism, unsustainable habits. This is all from the human perspective. Now, if we were to look at this from the system admin's perspective, it's as if observing that users don't yet recognize critical system bugs. And it's as if the system admin is allowing humanity to see issues firsthand, not intervening too drastically yet. And also offering subtle hints, such as scientific discoveries, natural feedback loops, without forceful intervention. So we go to the second stage. So the first stage is, in some sense, denial. You deny that there is some issues in the world. You, in some sense, deny that you can actually be involved in a bigger picture of what happens on this planet, and so you, stay under the rock you've been living in, right? So we have to kind of consider, there's denial going on here. Now, the second stage of Kubler-Ross was anger. So I'm sharing this example, kind of being like, hey, I'm looking at human beings in a world and how they're going to progress into the future. And in some sense, the levels, they kind of like the stages they go through, and the final destination is towards a very advanced humanity. Now, it is true that we say none of us knows what's going to happen in the future, but you can look at any moment in life and your mind can propose probabilities to it. Do you know, you can even look at this talk, look at the title, and it could kind of like foreshadow something, you know. It's so there is there is that. Anyways, we go to stage 2, anger. So stage 2 can be summarized through the sentence, why is this happening to us? Someone must be to blame. This one's interesting. The human perspective says that conflicts erupt. For example, there's even generations blaming each other, right? So countries are like, it's your fault, you know, and other countries like, it's your fault. And then the leaders are like, nah, man, it's, you know, that person's fault, right? And then there could be even fault pointing generationally, where it's like, yo, man, those people alive before us kind of messed up, or those people alive before us were better than us, you know? And we can never be the same, for example. So the human perspective, conflicts erupt, blaming others, countries, leaders, generations, for example. Frustration over loss of traditional ways of life, discomfort with forced evolution, increased polarization and turmoil, trying to pinpoint culprits for system failures. For systemic failures. This is the human perspective. Now let's try to consider what the system admin would perceive. System admin is looking at this whole world and in some sense it's aware of humanity's pain and frustration. The system admin looks at the state of human beings in anger and in some sense introducing stronger feedback to encourage corrective action, using crises as necessary stimuli for deeper introspection and systematic awakening. So first stage of the human species, there's nothing fundamental. At the stage of denial, there's nothing fundamentally wrong. Life is normal. It's denial of what we actually, what the true human responsibility is. The second stage is anger. Why is this happening to us? Someone must be to blame. Why do we have these kind of leaders? Well, you know, why aren't there more advanced systems? Why aren't there more advanced cures? Why aren't there more advanced solutions? There's an anger, you know, about where the world is. And this sort of anger can fuel a lot of lectures. Stage 3, bargaining. So the human perspective, it's limited attempts at fixing systematic laws, environmental reform, technological tweaks, partial shifts towards renewable energy, negotiating short-term sacrifices for long-term survival, seeking compromise to retain familiar comforts with minimal disruption. From the perspective of the system admin, it would be allowing incremental changes while monitoring whether the system stabilizes. Providing opportunities for innovation, supporting pioneers who test new systematic solutions, testing humanity's sincerity and maturity. Assessing collective readiness for major system upgrade. See, I think it's a very interesting idea that a human being needs to sacrifice short-term value for long-term value. And when you look at the human species, it's as if human beings are still functioning under the perspective that they're here for 100 years. The problems of the world are too big to solve. So let me kind of like, you know, try to live well in my little world and not care about the world beyond. This is the main shift that I think needs to happen for human beings. And you know what's strange? This might take as long as the moment where our lifespans increase. because the expectations of the human being, let's say, just for the sake of it being simpler, let's say it's 100 years. Your plans right now for a human being, let's say it's for 100 years. Let's say you look at, I don't know, the aristocracy, and the aristocracy at least is thinking of, let's say, future generations, but they're not thinking about the well-being of future generations. They're thinking about their own future generations' well-being, right? Which strangely collects to the collective well-being, you know. But so right now on this planet, upon, let's say, this moment's analysis, I can tell you that, yeah, I mean, how many human beings do you think are living lives that they care for the future of the future? They don't, do you know? And of course, because there's the notion of a system admin, it doesn't mean that it's in control. So, whoever you are listening, I'm going to ask you this question. How far have you thought about life? How far have you looked into what's going to happen? You know, and how can we say who truly smart person? Is a smart person planning for 100 years of life? Let's start like this. Is a smart person planning just for tomorrow? Is a smart person planning for, let's say, 20 years, 50 years of life? Is a smart person planning for 100 years of life? Or is a smart person looking at this system and in some sense realizing that this massive boat that is harboring all these human beings, it's going to sail on. Just like back in the day before the airplane was made, human beings had, in some sense, fictional narratives of like boats sailing through clouds. Wonder about the future. Wonder about the future of all of us. It's a privilege, I find. Anyways, so we went through 3 stages of humanity. Stage 1, denial. There's nothing fundamentally wrong. Life is normal. Stage 2, anger. Why is this happening to us? Someone must be to blame. Stage 3, maybe we can fix it with minor adjustments. Let's try small changes. Now we go to phase 4, depression. We might have caused irreversible damage. Maybe it's too late. So from the human perspective, societal existential crises, awareness to opportunities, irreversible harm, environmental, societal, psychological, collective questioning of purpose, meaning, and sustainability, potential demoralization, widespread anxiety, and mental health struggles due to perceived hopelessness. Right now, people are feeling like the depression that human beings are feeling. This is on, let's say, a smaller scale. It's like individual humans in some sense being depressed because they see a sort of other human beings living a certain life, and let's say maybe they're not, or they see a higher standard of life and maybe they can't, access that. Human beings are that sort of depressed. They're individually depressed, but collective depression would be something in the lines of like a meteor. It's like an inevitable meteor is going to hit the earth, or that, like, I don't know, let's say world wars begin, right? Or intense tragedies happen. Do you understand? So right now your emotional up your emotion is how your emotions are going up and down pretty much It's based on your perception of your individual outcome. But when you look at the collective outcome, it's very intense. That means it's like maybe in the future, human beings need to be trained to be even capable of considering the bigger picture without being overwhelmed. Now, how would the system admin see this stage? It would be compassionately observing human sorrow, preparing supportive measures, introducing deeper philosophical and spiritual insights to help humanity navigate existential dread, quietly initiating foundational shifts in awareness, global spiritual awakening, deeper empathy. Now we go to stage 5, acceptance. We must fundamentally change our ways. We embrace this new direction. So from the human perspective, there's deep acceptance of need for profound systemic transformation. There's global cooperation emerging out of necessity, supported by new ethics, technology, and spirituality, let's say. Embracing interconnectedness, collective responsibility, and sustainable, harmonious living. Now we go to the perspective from the system admin. That was the human perspective. Actively assisting humanity's transition to a higher level of systemic functionality, providing clearer inspiration, direct support through consciousness evolution, higher empathy, deeper insights, more advanced technological breakthroughs. Observing with satisfaction as humanity learns and embodies lessons necessary for an advanced civilization. So our species, just like human beings go through the Kubler-Ross model, will go through the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and in some sense acceptance. For me, when I of course I haven't given these talks for a while, but before, when I would speak about an advanced civilization, it was through this perspective that human beings require an acceptance of reality. I've personally observed, like, I attempted to create like a Facebook group for this channel, and the people that came in that Facebook group were, I'm like, okay, certain human beings are still stuck on individual games. They haven't even reached a collective game. What that means is, when you begin your day or when you wake up, how are you going about processing what is real, right? And most human beings are filtering the meaning of life through themselves. And that's because their self is the most important thing to them. However, what is more important than yourself? This is a very important thing to consider, because global emotional maturity is dependent on it. See, when we look at just like human beings who've lived in this planet so far, if you ask who is immature and who is mature, for example, the immature entity cannot be responsible for what is happening to it completely. So it needs to shift blame. So let's say you dislike yourself. Your mind may propose to you that you don't dislike yourself, it's that you actually dislike others in the world. If you analyze reality through the lens of self, there's others in world, and of course there's a system admin. Human beings are struggling to accept themselves. But I wonder how fascinating life would be when you see that 8 billion human beings have accepted themselves, and they have now moved on towards real. They've accepted themselves, they've accepted others. What that means is, let's say you're with a fool, you're hanging out with a fool, and that fool does something that upsets you, you know? Now, at first you're like, yo man, it's the fool's fault, right? You can't accept it. Then you realize you can't accept it because it's it was your responsibility that you were beside a fool. Do you understand? So then you kind of come into this point where you're like, man, it was my fault. And anything that is really our fault at first kind of depresses us. You know, it brings down our, let's say, energetic vibrance. But at some point, if you develop the capability to see yourself outside of yourself, you will be fascinated by how many layers of perception there are. Do you know? Guys, I'm being honest here in the sense that I've legit had people like email me, right? Like people who listen to these talks, and for me, they've been like psychological case studies in the sense where I'm like, okay, this person is like stuck in their own world. Their reality is limited to only what they believe. And in some sense, they are incapable of wondering that there is another angle to how they're being. So if we were, anyways, to wonder about the stages that Earth currently is in, let's say it can be in stage 2 and 3. Stage 2 is evident in global conflicts, ideological polarization, blame-driven politics, cultural wars, and resistance to change. Stage 3, bargaining, is visible through gradual acknowledgement of environmental and societal crises, and limited reforms, renewable energy, international agreements, technological optimism. You know, what's funny, kind of to consider, is that strategically, let's say human beings were right now united, all 8 billion of us, okay, we were collectively united. If there was another, let's say, advanced, let's say planets were at wars, were like fighting each other, that other planet strategy would in some sense be what is culturalism now. It's divide and conquer. So it's like human beings, they are unified by their position, and they're unified by their form, and they also become unified by their values. But strategically, if you wanted to divide and conquer the human species, it would be as if like, yo man, I'm gonna first of all make this united force separate. So I'm gonna give different cultures to all these different people, so they're gonna start fighting within each other. Do you see? So it would be a divide and conquer strategy, and right now the human species is divided. So if it was in some sense attacked or invaded, it would be conquered easily. And you know, if the civilization currently is in anger and bargaining, this means that there is an expected global depression. Do you know what that means? That means, this is just a thought, okay? But it means that the future, strangely, if accordance to this workable model, it needs to become depressed. That means if there are people who are angry right now at reality, you know, they need to come to this conclusion that it's in some sense they need to reach a point of acceptance. Let's say you have a family member that is foolish. They're still your family, yet they are foolish. So you get depressed for a while of that person being foolish, but at some point you kind of shift and you're like, okay, this person is a fool, right? But what can update the overall? Because when I think about the past, what comes through my mind is scrolling through all the scenarios that could have gone better. You kind of get depressed when you look at the past. But when you look at the future, where do you think your hope is? So from the system admin's perspective, looking at humanity and looking at reality as a sort of simulation of the system admin, and Islamically, this simulation all returns back to the system admin. So when before I've mentioned this, I've said this saying, the future right now is because if the system admin is watching us right now, and if this whole system turns back to the system admin, technically the future has been watching us from the beginning. So strangely, I believe that the future is watching us right now. And people can laugh, people can judge, but I honestly feel that this perspective that the unborn future generations, if they were watching you right now, how would you behave? You would probably be embarrassed. So from the system admin's perspective, advanced users who consciously participate in the simulation's evolution, achieving a state of global interconnected consciousness, embodying emotional mastery, collective empathy, technological sophistication, and deep spiritual wisdom. Collaboratively co-creating a version upgrade, transforming Earth into a harmonious, sustainable, and enlightened civilization. The human being wants what's more advanced. And if it understood what is more advanced, it would want it. So I think it's not too much of a far-fetched idea to look at how the individual mechanism is functioning and wondering about its global significance in the sense of like, okay, what is an individual human being doing and what is humanity doing? If this was a system right now, this is a system in my view, it means that there is code. It means that it is programmed. As an individual, the weight of shifting the world is too heavy. Maybe in the future it simplifies. Opening your eyes in a simulation of the world, of a world. You move every day occupied by the tasks of the individual. You live your life as if you are the destiny of it all. But to be capable to consider, and this was the might of the religious intent, that, O human being, think of what comes after. Think of who will walk this earth after you. Think of what the world will look like after this cultural position it's in. Think in some sense where you will in some sense walk to next after this life. And so the curiosity, or I should say, I don't know, but as a person in this world, when I was saying earlier that there's moments I pause in this life, I do wonder how it's going to conclude. I do wonder, who I really am. I do wonder who all of you really are. I do wonder what is the extent of human capability and what is the extent of permissible human capability, permissible by the system admin. I wonder what sort of ethics will be found in the future. I wonder how human beings will open their eyes to each other. I wonder if the future generations, in some sense, will fail to, in some sense, rise. And so if you are a human being and you look at the whole situation and you become depressed, strangely, that's a good thing. Because sooner or later, you will realize it's kind of like the game we're playing is change yourself or change the world. And when it reaches that point where you realize there needs to be greater changes in the world to accompany greater changes of self. As someone who considers a system admin, it's in some sense, that perspective is accessed through realizing what you have control over and what you don't have control, and noticing that still the system functions as it goes forth, and just becoming fascinated by how much life is bigger than all that you know, all that you think. It's as if you might think right now that there is no hope for you, but you don't know. The layers of perception are limited. But there's so much more layers of perception. When I walk throughout the day, when I go about my day, I kind of, smile behind my mind in a way where I'm like, wow, the future is going to be way more advanced, and it's going to be right here in this moment. That means in this moment right now that I'm existing, what advanced future technology will there be? What sort of advanced ways that all those basic simple things throughout life are happening, that they can happen? In how many ways could I have functioned, or that I didn't know about? You know, it does, you do reach a certain position of kindness after you realize that which is more valuable, the cruelty of the intellect, or in some sense, the elegance of kindness. And this kindness has levels to it. That means, have you been kind to yourself? Have you been kind to others? Have you been kind to your planet? Have you been acquainted with the idea that you can hold reality, objects, and subject in honor, in high regard? When you look at a human being, you can be like, this person is a fool, or you can in some sense be like, this person has a potential uh, that correlates to how foolish they have been. That means it's like you see a foolish person, and then imagine the next day you saw them suddenly no longer being foolish, and they look at you and you ask them, hey man, where'd the fool go? And that individual says, when I actually observed how foolish I was, I realized how intelligent I can be. Do you know? So it correlates. And so these are of course my own observations. So think of it this way: when a person becomes emotional, they're limiting their access to servers of perception, to layers of perception. And when they become emotional, right, they zoom in on one layer and they try to live life through that. And of course, human beings, we have a model of ourselves, and then there's, like, let's say people who are our role models. For example, as a Muslim, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is like a role model. You know, for me, it's actually Islam is a very advanced system. Do you know? It's as if of course the holy book is for those who believe in the unseen, and also those who realize that it is in some sense a warning and also a mercy to mankind, to beings, right? Because the ability to consider that there's a system admin is actually a sort of gateway to step out of the box of egotism. What that means is, let's say we go through the staircase of what is important. The person would be like, okay, myself is important, I'm important, you know. And if that person, if you have expectations on what is important, you know, and those expectations aren't met, you kind of descend in your psyche. So the person's like, yo man, I'm important, and if you expect people to treat you as important, then you get upset, you know, if they don't. Then you go to the view that others are important, and you're so you in some sense are seeing that, yo man, you know, others are important, and in some sense, you know, we should respect them and be kind to them, and then suddenly others treat you in, like, let's say, rude and insane ways, and you're like, in some sense, a part of you is like, man, you know, you expected others being important or having a sort of the importance model that you have for yourself, let's say. And when that expectation isn't met, so again, a descent in the psyche. So the importance of self. First, the person's like, I'm important. You know, why are people saying that I'm important? Then you're like, others are important, you know, and then they do foolish stuff, and you're like, oh my God, you know. And then you go and you say the world is important, you know, but the world is in some sense, let's say, from one perspective, just landscape, just like a place, you know, and the place is going to be here longer than we're going to be in the place. But eventually when you move up in, let's say again, through the staircase and wonder about the responsibility factor of it, we know that worlds have an agent. So you are in the agency of your world, and so internally, but externally there is an agent. There's an agency. So I've talked about it as a divine agency. So you're a being that is functioning through layers of perception. Your emotions are based on how you zoom in and zoom out of these layers of perception, and also based on the expectations you have for these layers of perception. For there to be a system admin means that this system admin is not administered by you. Because it is not administered by you, of course there's limitations to how much of it you can change. But contacting the system admin, reaching out to the system admin, can sometimes be very liberating, and having the capability to acknowledge, not be in denial of the wrongs you have done, but to accept them and realize that if there is a system admin, there requires to be an apology. So in religious matters, this is called repentance. What that means is maybe you've been doing something for a while and you didn't realize it was wrong, and you suddenly realize it was wrong, you know? Anyways, guys, thank you for listening. And wonder about reality. And wonder so deeply that you can, in some sense, notice how much better it can be. Anyways, thank you for listening. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise due to the Lord of the Worlds, the system admin, the one and only. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most benevolent, the most merciful. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you for listening.